welcome to Researcher Revealed. I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin, host of the podcast, where we go behind just reading the name on a paper or conference presentation to find out who it was who ran that research, why they ran it, and indeed even how they got involved in research. On this week's episode, I tap into the beginning of my research journey, and I reached out to a friend of mine whom way back when in a basement in the University of Toronto, we actually worked together in different projects, but in the same lab at the beginning of my research journey. Professor AdaTang from McMaster University very kindly has agreed to come on and share all about her research journey. It was a fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But before we start that episode, please remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow whatever it is on whichever platform that you are listening to. And also, if you have questions for Professor Tang, do leave them on the YouTube video because it's the easiest way for me to find them to make sure they get directed to her. That's great. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Hi everybody, welcome to the next episode on Researcher Revealed. On today's episode, we have a Canadian guest joining us, always a special place in my heart, being Canadian myself. We have the very lovely and eminent Professor AdaTang joining us from Canada. Ada, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so happy to be here. I'm Ada Tang. I'm a physiotherapist and a professor at McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, Canada, just outside Toronto. I am also the assistant dean of our Rehabilitation Sciences graduate programs. Yeah.
For more details, everybody who's listening, we'll have her bio in the episode description. You can dive in there. It's always one of those weird things, like you kind of feel odd introducing yourself, and I don't want to make mistakes introducing you. So go to the episode description. Everything's in there for all of the wonderful things that Ada does. Right. Well, before we get into how you got into research and what you're researching, Ada, we're going to do the Rapid 11. Are you ready?
Sure.
Don't worry, it's nothing scary. First question, are you a Windows or a Mac user?
Mac.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a big hint in your background because there's a Mac computer.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee right now, and then I switch to tea in the afternoon.
Oh, nice. When you're writing or doing like concentration work, do you prefer to have music in the background or silence?
Music.
Music. Oh, nice. Where do you tend to work? At home or at an office at the university?
A mix of places. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, a mix of places. Yeah, both at home, at the office, but then sometimes just for a change of scenery, coffee shops, the library, like wherever that might be. Yeah. I'm very
Nice.
portable. I like to think I'm portable.
Nice. I love it. I like being portable as well. I actually found like I was in Oslo for a course before Christmas, and I found my new favorite office. The only problem is it's in Oslo. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but the Dijkman Library, oh my word, it's beautiful.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. Let's go to Oslo together and work beside each other in that library.
Oh, let's do that. We got to find a way to fund that.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I like it. What time of day, so not like hour, but generically, what time of day do you feel you're most productive?
Uh, Ugh. It fluctuates. I feel like as you know, Rosalind, like you're working 24/7, so you kind of have to be productive all of those hours. Mornings, I'm not a morning person, but I've found now that if I get up in the morning and before everyone else gets to the office, I'm very productive then. Um, and then yeah, I get back home and maybe have a workout, have dinner, and then I find productivity time then after. So yeah. 24/7.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah, all the time.
24 hours. The curse of being a researcher, I'd say. Right. This is my actual favorite question to ask because I love the reactions that I get. What is your favorite referencing management system or software
Oh
program?
my goodness. Yeah, I'm sure you get a reaction. Can I cheat and say I don't even do my own references now anymore? Oh, that sounds so horrible.
No, 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 no. No,
I
actually,
I
it sounds amazing, and I can't wait till I get to that stage.
I have an incredible research coordinator. Shout out to Hannah, who we've been working together for many years now. And when I need references done for a grant or paper, I'm like, Hannah, can you insert these in? So I'm embarrassed to say I don't even know what software we're using.
No, because actually, and I'm going to make you feel better for a second. Hold that thought, get your head out of your hand. Is actually, you would probably be surprised at the number of people who actually say their tool that they use to do the referencing is other people. You're not
Oh,
alone.
okay,
So
okay.
don't panic, Will Robinson. What about making figures and graphs and like your data visualization? Is that something you also have somebody to hand over to?
I do. My students are really, really good at that. And we have a couple of different softwares that we have in the lab. I haven't had to do anything too fancy, but I do love making a good PowerPoint. So I take a
Mm,
lot of pride in my PowerPoint, and I still do that
nice.
myself. So it's not necessarily a lot of very, detailed graphics, but if it's kind of layout and design and how things are moving around and animating, then I do that in PowerPoint.
Nice. Like it, like it. All right, now for a little bit of naughtiness, maybe. What is your favorite desk snack? Sit and work, and do you munch on food?
I do, but it just depends on what's in the cupboard. So I'll grab
Oh,
things from the cupboard and it's
yeah.
in my little lunch bag. So it could be anything. Sometimes it's usually mostly like a bar or, a piece of fruit like a, little orange or a banana or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah.
Cool, cool. Yeah, there's no right or wrong to these. It's just fun and interesting to hear what people get up to. Right, almost there. When you're planning or organizing, so whether that's something to do about course content or a research paper or a project or grant or whatever, are you somebody who does that organization on digital tools or are you a pen and paper person?
Mostly digital,
Oh,
but I still am a bit of paper. Actually, probably a lot of like just scribbling paper.
yeah.
My students know that I think better with a Sharpie in my hand. So if I am like writing things, it's not just like with a pencil and a paper, like I go full marker. So
Oh,
I have a lot of scrap paper around me. I'm looking at my desk right now. We have a bin in our front office called goose paper, good on one side. And it's just
oh,
paper
I
that's
love
printed. And I just take goose paper all the time. And it's just my scribble notes and a Sharpie and goose paper. And that's where some of that creative thinking goes, or if I'm just
yeah,
kind of muddled through something. But my
nice.
calendar and everything is on my phone, and notes and reminders to myself. I kind of, for the most
Yeah,
part, use my phone and my computer.
yeah. Okay, so the fun, let's call it the fun
The
thinking. So
fun
like
stuff
how to
is,
start, that's pen and paper, but
mhm,
like the space
the
where you don't
operational.
want to use your brain for that, like when your appointments are and lectures are and things like that. That's more okay. Cool, cool. Very interesting. Right. Second last question. What book are you currently reading?
I just finished, like yesterday, Trevor
Mm.
Noah's book, Born a Crime.
Ooh.
Yeah, I just finished it yesterday on the train going home, and it was really, really good. It was not what I expected. It was like I thought I would learn a little bit. I knew it was an autobiography, and I thought it would be about him and his, growing up in South Africa and then launching his
Yeah.
comedy career. But comedy career was like maybe like one line in the entire book, and the rest of it is about him growing up in apartheid South Africa and then post-apartheid South Africa, and his, his identity as a mixed race kid, and what that meant for him growing up, and his very, very strong mother. And it was fascinating. It was so good. I
It's
just
on
finished
my
it.
it's on my read list. I just got back, like, well, not just before Christmas. My husband and I went on a holiday to South Africa, and we did a walking tour around like the historical sites and stuff. And we got to the outside of this building where you had two separate waiting benches outside that were still labeled colored and non-colored people from the apartheid times. And the guide mentioned actually a really good book to read to get a better sense of what life was like then is Noah's book. So yeah, it's on my list.
Yeah, it actually gave me like a lot of, I realized how little I knew other than like the very kind of surface level of apartheid. But
Yeah.
what did that mean for, the Black people in Africa, and also what that meant in post-apartheid South Africa, and that transition. It was
Very
really good.
interesting.
Anyway, yeah,
Very
yeah.
interesting. Very cool. Last question is who is a researcher that you admire?
Oh, so many. But I will definitely say the most influential people in my life are Dr. Gina Brooks, who is my graduate
Yeah.
supervisor at the University of Toronto, which is where you and I met.
Yeah.
And then my postdoctoral fellowship supervisor, that's Dr. Janice Eng at the University of British Columbia. Those two very, very accomplished researchers, very influential researchers in my own life, not only for their research um, knowledge and expertise, but just as human beings and as mentors and as women in science. And yeah.
Ooh, fascinating. Okay. Okay. It's giving me food for thought for some questions a little later.
Okay.
That's it to wrap at 11. I told you they weren't that scary. Just a few little questions just to get to know you a little bit better, get to know some fun things about you, have a giggle, kind of get warmed up and stuff. Before we dive right into it. So, if you would be so kind as to share with all of us, you kind of hinted at it in your introduction of yourself. As a physiotherapist, what introduced you and made you want to have research as a part of your career?
It wasn't part of the plan when I graduated from
Ooh,
physiotherapy. No, I was not interested in research at all. And so I had worked. I had worked for a few years in as a physiotherapist. I worked in a hospital. I got a job right away. I started off in complex continuing care, which at
okay.
one of the hospitals in Toronto. Um, Moved into one of the other sites of the same hospital where I moved into neurorehabilitation. So stroke rehabilitation
Hmm?
and acquired brain injury. And that was all amazing. I loved being a PT and neuro rehab. Funny enough, I didn't even think I was going to stay in the hospital. When I graduated, I thought I'd get the first job that I would get, and then I would move into private practice, into sports therapy.
Oh,
And I never left the hospital. I never left neuro. Yeah, I don't know. Uh, it was just it was just so fascinating to me and so rewarding. The ability to work with, the all the patients that came through the hospital, but also with the team that we worked with. When
hmm.
somebody comes in with a brain injury or a stroke, it's not just about the physiotherapist. it's it has to be the whole entire team. And I was learning things about, okay, if somebody has a communication disorder, how can I make sure that I'm conveying what I need to convey in PT to that patient, and use strategies to help support their communication if they have aphasia, or how do I support their, exercises if they have apraxia, or maybe they have a memory impairment and they don't remember what we did like
Yeah.
yesterday or even 20 minutes ago. And so
Yeah.
it was always so fascinating to me. So I there was no reason for me to leave.
Okay.
Um, and then at that time, the physiotherapy profession in Canada was moving from an undergraduate degree in physiotherapy, which is what I have,
Mm-hmm.
towards a master's, and
Okay.
which I didn't have. And so as schools are moving towards that, I was realizing that the students that I might have been supervising who were coming into placement with me, I was starting to get involved with a little bit of teaching at the university, being a lab tutor
Mm-hmm.
and a case facilitator that, these students were now going to have a degree that was more than mine. And should I
Okay.
consider a master's? So it was that's how the like kind of idea started to trickle into my
Ah.
brain. As I was getting more involved in the university, I became reconnected with Dr. Dina Brooks, and she knew me from my undergrad as PT, but she thought maybe Ada would be interested in doing her master's, so asked me about it, and it was probably just that spark that I needed to push me over and say, well, yeah, okay, maybe I would consider research. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how it started, and even
Okay.
then, I didn't think I was going to continue on to do my PhD. I was planning to do my master's,
Yeah.
get a master's, try some research, and then go back to being a PT. And then now we all know what happened. I just continued along that path. So I guess the thing I always reflect on is that, you never know where life is going to take you. You never know what doors are going to open, and you never know what's going to happen when you walk through them.
I love that. Okay, so I know where you are now, but for people who might not have heard who you are before today, um, so did your master's, did your PhD, and then recently now, been promoted, achieved. What to be a professor in Canada, is that a promotion? Is it an achievement? How does that work? What do you have to
So
do to be a professor in Canada?
yeah, so yes, PhD. I went on post PhD to do a postdoctoral fellowship. So that's additional research training. I applied for faculty appointments at universities all over Canada, um, and um, and was very fortunate to land here at McMaster. So at McMaster, our faculty appointment, entry level faculty appointment, is at an assistant professor level.
Okay.
And so we do that, that would be called kind of tenure track or pre-tenure
Okay.
at an
Yep.
assistant professor level. And then we go through the tenure process that takes about 5 years. And once we have tenure, then I'm associate professor. And you can stay at associate professor in Canada for your whole career.
Oh.
Or you can be promoted to full professor. And that's, for people who continue to grow their research program, establish, a more international reputation and have
Hmm.
international impact for their research. So I did submit my kind of package for promotion to full professor
Yeah.
2 years ago, and I just got it last year. So yeah,
Woo!
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's very cool. Okay. I'm just fascinated because there are differences between
Yes.
countries and how it works and stuff. So it's just fascinating to hear what it was like for you as a physio in Canada. Just out of curiosity, what went in that package for consideration of promotion?
A statement that describes my research program and the
Okay.
contributions of my research program and
Okay.
how it has impacted the field, the breadth of my collaborations. So I talked about some of the national work that we're doing in Canada, but also
Hmm.
my collaborations with international colleagues in
Okay.
my field. So things like that, and then a teaching dossier to talk about my teaching contributions, some I wasn't involved in this, but it goes through external review, and there's some, external evaluation of my package
Yeah.
from people who are outside of our university. So, yeah.
Whoa, so that's like really intense. It's almost like, in a weird way, a bit of a mini PhD without a defense.
Yeah, without the defense, I go through, at our school, we go through a few different levels. So we submit our package to our own department, and it's
Hmm.
scrutinized by our own department very carefully by committee.
Yeah.
So have they met these standards? Like, would they hold up to external review? Would they, but even before it goes to external review, will they hold up to kind of beyond our program, our department? Does it hold up against the faculty, and then at the the larger school between faculties and the Senate and then the university? The higher up it goes, there's still some scrutiny, but I think the
Yeah.
closest is like kind of the
The
first two
initial.
stages. Yeah.
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 Wow, that's fascinating. I'm nowhere near that yet, so I'm actually asking for myself out of curiosity. Um, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Ada. Now on to the more fun stuff. So again, in the introduction, you talked about having a lab. Now, being from Canada, having been in a lab there, I'm a little bit more familiar, but within within research in the UK, especially for people who are clinicians, they don't tend to use that term or say they have a lab. So what does that mean as far as you being a physiotherapist and having a lab? Are you doing blood work? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a funny term, isn't it? Because I think
Mm.
most of us would think of a lab as, yeah, centrifuge machines and microscopes and like
Yeah,
things like that.
exactly.
And I think we use that term loosely. I do
Okay.
have a physical space. I have access to a physical lab space.
Yeah.
I'm putting air quotes here, and it's shared. It's something that we share amongst our school, members of our school. But I think there's a lot of faculty who have research programs, and they call their lab, they say I have a lab, but it's not a physical space. It's a lab group, and they call it the
Yeah, yeah,
lab.
like
So the lab is getting together, or our lab is doing this.
yeah.
Um, so because a lot of our faculty might be doing work in the community, or they might be working with schools, or they might be working in the hospitals, and they might be partnering with community partners. So they don't necessarily have to have a physical space on campus at the
Right.
university.
Yeah.
Less of a priority, but it depends on your research area. So because we do a lot, my work is really focused on physical exercise, physical activity and exercise after stroke as a means of promoting health and promoting recovery, promoting mobility after stroke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we do trials where we have exercise training. And so our
Okay.
physical lab space has exercise equipment. We have some recumbent
Ah, okay.
steppers, we have
Yeah.
bikes, we have, a
Yeah.
plinth where we can do some of our assessments. And then we have an interview space where if we need to, we're administering questionnaires and things like that, and just for a little bit of privacy. So we're very fortunate to have access to this physical lab space. It's just in another building. I'm pointing over there because it's in a building adjacent. Um, but it's great to have. It's great to have.
That sounds phenomenal. Like, um, I don't know, because here in the UK, I've been very focused on research that happens in a clinical environment. And so we don't typically think of having a lab space per se, but I've started now collaborating with some researchers at a university, and they have like all sorts of like assessment, like exercise physiology assessment equipment and stuff. And so it's just kind of gotten my brain thinking about, I think especially like physio, I can see how that makes sense, but it's kind of getting my wheels thinking about what does a lab look like for a nurse, for a cardiac physiologist, for a fill in the blank kind of researcher. So yeah, very interesting.
I think there are pros and cons. So the way where our university is situated, is not close to some of my closest hospital partners. So
Okay.
it does make it challenging if I want to work with our clinical partners at, an academic center,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not easy for me to get there. It's probably a 10 or 15-minute drive and parking and that kind of thing. If I want to do testing with patients who are inpatients at the hospital, or maybe
Yeah.
they're coming through the hospital for their appointments, I don't have as ready access to them. By the
Okay.
same token, if I recruit them and we say, we're doing this study, it's taking place at the university in our lab,
Yeah.
that's not a space that they're familiar with. So then they're thinking, well, how do I get to the university? Where's parking and how close is that
Yeah.
to the lab? And so it does create a barrier, I think, when it comes to clinical research, and we really want to have that like close connection with clinicians and
Yeah.
and with the patients. And I definitely feel separated here. Um,
Okay.
I definitely feel separated here. So yeah, there are pros and cons. It's nice to have the dedicated space. I wish that we could be geographically closer to the
Mm.
hospitals, or if there was some magic way where we could have research space in the hospitals, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So that I find that really interesting. So with your role and the research that you've built, informal decision then, would you say that it falls much more in like an academic space versus the clinical space? And do you as a physiotherapist, do you still practice clinically or are you merely academic now? Or not
Yeah,
merely, that's a wrong word to say. Are you focused on academic? Pardon my words.
no, 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 no. So to your first question, yes, academic setting more than clinical setting. And I think that's just the way my research has evolved when I've
Hmm.
arrived here at McMaster. Um, I do not work clinically anymore, and it's been a number of years since I've worked clinically. I reconcile that in my mind in knowing that I had worked clinically for a long time before
Yeah.
I even came to research. So I hope that those years as a clinician for me, they were so foundational for me as a person
Mm.
professionally, but also
Yeah.
informing my research. And I think because of the amazing clinicians that are out there, I
Hmm.
get to continue to learn from them and
Okay.
work with them.
Yeah.
So even though I don't work clinically anymore, I have really terrific clinician partners who are there, who continue to keep me grounded, right? And I
Yeah.
hope that we can have conversations and they'll know that I know what they're talking about
Yeah.
because having been a clinician, even though it was a long time ago. Um, but it does make it harder. I think there are some places like when we were in Toronto,
Yeah.
our university building was only 2 doors down from the hospital where I was
Mm.
doing my work. And so
Mm.
it was across the street and it was
Mm.
more accessible. We also had we also had some physical space in the hospital
Yeah.
where in Toronto. And it was similar setup when I was at the University of British Columbia. Our research lab was situated within the rehab center in Vancouver, which was amazing. It just doesn't physically work out the same way here in at McMaster for me. So I've had to
So,
pivot, right? Like, so in terms
yeah.
of like, yeah, in terms of like, how do you build a research program that still keeps with the things that are
Yeah.
important to me and meaningful to
Yeah.
me, but maybe now there are these new barriers and challenges that I hadn't experienced before in kind of my past experiences, but how can I work around it? How can I navigate
Mm.
it to make it work? Yeah.
So I'm just fascinated by this because in the UK, for the last couple of years now, there's been a real push, and I don't know if you've heard the term or not, for clinical academics. And it's sort of this term that the definition widely varies depending on who you ask what that means. But in general, it's this concept of having a clinician who also has the skills to do research and the training to do research, but that their job encapsulates both things. So to a degree, they'll still remain clinical, but then they'll also have a connection to the university in order to do that program of research. And the theory behind it is then because that's in a single human, it will increase the probability that the research is connected to real clinical problems, but it will still have the rigor of more robust research compared to like a clinical audit or quality improvement work or things like that. Not that those are bad or wrong, but just have that stronger weight. But very few places in the UK have successfully navigated or created a career path that supports such an individual, and it's down to that individual advocating for themselves, getting in separate funding. So it's not 100% of a beautiful model, as much as it sometimes sounds like a beautiful thing. But it sounds like to me that you were managing to do similar, but you've done it by maintaining contemporary connections to clinicians. What was it that inspired you to build those connections?
Being a clinician myself, I think that has always remained central to my research. And it was a big part of the decision making for me when I was halfway through my master's. So I'm going to rewind the clock back to that time where I had shared, I was only going to do my master's. I really wasn't even thinking about PhD. And partway through my master's, my supervisor said, "You're going to continue. So you're going to continue on to do your PhD, right?" And I was completely like, "What are you talking about? Like, what?" But then she planted that seed in my head, and it made me think, "Oh, like, should I? Could I? Like, could I? Am I even fit for this?" Like, and so I was at this crossroads where I thought I was going to go back to being a physiotherapist. After I got my master's, I get some research experience, go back to my clinical degree, maybe find a way to stay connected to the lab because it was still in the same hospital. It was awesome. I loved it. Or do I change paths now and go down the path of a PhD? So we all know what happened. I went down the path of a PhD, but the way I reconciled that in my mind was that, okay, I know that being a clinician is so important to me. If I go down the path of PhD, then I want to make sure that all of my research will be clinically important, that we ask questions that will be important to clinicians and to patients. I don't want to step so far away from my own experience and my own background that I'm doing things that are no longer relevant to the people who are still at the front lines and the patients who are still coming into the hospital. So that's remained central throughout my program. So we have a similar, I think that the similar idea in Canada is a clinician-scientist. Sounds like very similar to the clinician-academic, where it's some blend of clinical role or clinical background and research. And same thing in Canada, I think similar to the UK, it's been challenging to navigate. For each person has a very different experience of what clinician scientist role looks like for them, because there's no infrastructure right now in the hospitals or in the universities, let alone for both of them to come together to create pathways for clinician scientists or clinician academics. So it has very much been individual people advocating for themselves, creating their own path, right? And blazing their own trail, because it's all uncharted territory, especially for people who are non-physicians, non-MDs. So for nursing, for PT, for occupational therapy, for a lot of other professions, having a clinician scientist role is very, very new and very novel.
Yeah.
So I have, you know, I like to think of myself as a clinician scientist. I don't have clinical responsibilities anymore, but I am still a clinician
Yeah.
and I am a scientist. I have a
But
colleague. I have a colleague at McMaster. We started our appointment at the same time. She does have clinical role. Her lab or her research takes place in one of the hospitals, but she works 1 day a week as a PT at the hospital, and her research is embedded within that hospital. So that's what that looks like for her.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's because I know you and I know some of like your journey from our time when we were together in the basement lab in Toronto. Um, is I think it's a really important thing that needs to be said and needs to be aired because I think this push to be this clinical academic and to have or clinical scientist or whatever you want to call it, have this multi-faceted role that means you have to, do more than one job and potentially have more than one boss with different priorities and all of these other things. I think the focus on that being the thing and the novel breaking thing actually takes away from the fact that like you said, and I feel this very strongly as well, like you might take the nurse out of the hospital, but you don't take the nurse out of the human.
Hmm.
And I think,
Hmm.
like you've said, similar, like walking that pathway, having the experiences that a clinician in a hospital has, like it changes how you view the world, how you view a given phenomenon or a problem. And I think, like you said, like clinicians, we want to help people, we want to improve their pathways. And so it's about how can we do that through research? And so I've spoken to other people like yourself who are more removed now from that clinical environment, or even people here in the UK who class themselves as clinical academics, but their clinical role is a leadership role. So it's not necessarily a patient-facing role. And that's why I say later, there's a lot of diversity in it. And I love that you consider yourself a clinical scientist because you are. Because you're doing research about clinical problems with patients, and patients live in more spaces than a hospital.
Yeah. 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 You're right. Because
So,
even when people are, we bring people who've been discharged from hospital, they're living in the community. Exercise is still going to be an important part of your life. We'd love to invite you to come take part in our study. Um, that's still part of that person's journey of
mm,
living with stroke, recovering from stroke,
yeah,
preventing another stroke from happening, whatever that
yeah.
might be.
No, so thank you for sharing that because I think it's an important message for people out there to hear because I think, yeah, there's a lot of I'm better than you are sometimes in the world of research, and I don't subscribe to that. So right, just looking at the time, and somehow it's already like flying by. I'd like to switch a little bit. I knew this would happen. It'd be like a heartbeat, and it'd be over this hour. Switch a little bit, and if you're happy, to share a little bit, maybe around some of the research, like you've talked about it generically, but where you're focusing your research at the minute within physical activity and rehabilitation and stroke.
Sure, yeah, for sure. We've just wrapped a couple of trials that we're really excited about. Both of them are looking at um, intensity of exercise, if I can say
Okay.
that. So we know that exercise is beneficial. We we haven't quite figured out, what is, are there, better ways to prescribe exercise in terms of how often they do it, or how intense they're working, or how long the program is. So kind of fine-tuning that exercise programming and exercise prescription. We like to think that more is better, maybe more
Yeah.
frequent, or maybe harder intensity. But there probably is a fine balance, right? Not everyone, you can't exercise 7 days a week. So what's that balance? You
Yeah.
can't exercise at 100% or 110% of like, your maximum heart rate, right? Like, and so we have to balance all of that. We also have to balance with people with stroke. They've had a stroke, so their ability to move, their ability to push on a bike or on a stepper, whatever modality we're using, is going to be limited because of the stroke. So even if we might want to say, can you push harder because we think more is better, we have to consider, they have a stroke on top of that. So we have to work within that. So one of the studies we just wrapped and was published was around high intensity interval training after stroke. So
Okay.
HIIT.
Yeah.
And HIIT's got a lot of attention in, younger populations, athlete populations. It certainly has expanded to other groups as well, heart disease, spinal cord injury. It could be different things like that. And it has been looked at in stroke, but we wanted to see like how high could we push those high intensity intervals? And maybe we have to shorten the time. So instead of, you know, um, you know, 2 minutes on and then 3 minutes recovery, could we do 1 minute high and then give it, 1 minute recovery and then go back again with the next HIIT? So that's what we did. We did 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and we looked at that. Could they do it safely? What were the effects? And we just published a paper in the summer that found that it was safe, and compared to kind of moderate, like traditional kind of moderate, steady, continuous exercise, that there were some really dramatic improvements in their fitness levels, which was super exciting. And with a shorter amount of time, right? Like when you do
Yeah.
HIIT, I think that the total time of training was, 19 minutes, because it was like
Whoa.
10 bouts of up and then 9 bouts in between of
Yeah.
down, and then some cool down and some warm up at the beginning and end, compared to 30 minutes, right? So could you of continuous steady training. So with, 30% less time,
Yeah.
they were getting bigger improvements in their fitness level,
Oh.
which was really, really exciting for us to see.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then another study that we wrapped was looking at power focused training, strength training. So
Okay.
a
Okay.
lot of a lot of our work has focused on cardiovascular exercise or aerobic exercise. So put them
Mm-hmm.
on a bike or a stepper. We don't tend to use treadmills because not everyone with stroke can walk fast
Yeah.
enough, or let alone run on a treadmill. So we tend to use things that are seated, where we can strap their feet into a pedal
Yeah.
and then they can
Yeah.
push away. Um, but there's been a far less attention generally at looking at strength training after stroke. So most of the exercise literature has been dominated by aerobic exercise. One of
Mm-hmm.
my former PhD students was saying, why don't we look at strength training? I was like, well, that's a good question, right? Like there's some
Yeah.
studies that have looked at it, but again, a lot of people say people with stroke, it's not like they can lift dumbbells. It's not like we can put them on a bench press, right? Like they
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. But then he said, well, why not? Like, why can't we adapt some of those exercises so that they
Yeah.
can do it? And
Yeah.
why don't we prescribe strength training the same way we prescribe aerobic exercise? Like actually come up
Yeah.
with a prescription, determine what their progression should be, and then do it in a formal way, like not just go and do some 10 squats over here and then come back to me, like actually do it in a progressive, formalized manner.
Yeah.
And then he was also particularly interested in not just building strength, muscle strength, but what we call muscle power. So that's
Okay.
exercise, moving a load or weight at fast speeds where we need a
Yeah.
burst of power.
Yeah.
And again, it hasn't been looked at that much in stroke. There's been some really cool preliminary work that had started looking at it in stroke. but we didn't know, could they move quickly? Like stroke is, one of the cardinal signs is weakness, right? And
Yep.
with weakness is also slowing movement. And so can they generate enough contraction at the speed to kind of work towards muscle power?
Mm.
So we did a power focused training study. It was a
Mm-hmm.
small study, just, 15 people. Could we do it? Could we get people in 3 days a week? And could we do this training study? So we did it. It was 10 weeks. They started off with 1 week of just learn the movements, no weights, right? Like just if you don't know what a squat looks like, let's just do a squat with no weights, or let's just do a
Yeah.
bicep curl with no weights.
Yeah.
Let's do a shoulder raise with no weights. 1 week of that. Then the second phase was strength, building up strength. So we were progressing them through 4 weeks of strength training. And then the last 5 weeks were power. So we dropped the weight down and then had them do those exercises again, but just moving as quickly as you can. Just try to work on speed.
Mm.
And we need power for a lot of things. Like if I was to
Mm.
stand up out of this chair, I need a burst of power to stand up out of my chair.
Yep.
If I climb a flight of stairs, right? Every time I take a step, I need a burst of power to like take the next step. So we use power all the time. It's not just
Mm.
for powerlifting, like
Yeah.
Olympians, right? It's not that. It's just I need to cross the street and the light is changing and I need a burst of power. So we felt like this was very functional.
Yeah.
So we're going to expand on that. We just got some funding. We're going to do now a small randomized trial of power. Compare that to, because the first study just was a single, we didn't have a comparison group. This one we're
Mm-hmm.
going to compare to traditional strength training and see if there's any differences. And if it still looks good, we'll go on to a full randomized trial. So that's a couple of our exercise trials.
That's fascinating. I so well, no, it's really cool because I think it's one of those things like patients say to me all the time, I know I need to exercise, but how? Either because they view themselves as it's not appropriate to be in the gym because I'm not young, or, I struggle to walk, whether it's because of hemiplegia or effects of a stroke and just being moving a little bit slower or whatever, or whether it's down to, other chronic illnesses like COPD or heart failure. They're like, I can barely walk from here to the door without getting out of breath. Like, you're crazy to suggest exercise. And I think it's one of those things that is really important in order to build independence in somebody's life. Actually, this morning I was chatting, I had a working morning with a friend of mine. We are looking at trying to build some research together, and we were laughing because we were just chatting about life and what we're up to and whatnot. And she's like, I've kind of hit a stage now where I'm no longer going to the gym in order to like lose weight or look pretty. She's like, I'm just going to the gym so that when I'm 80 I'll be able to put my own underwear on.
Yeah.
But like, where are the guidelines in order to help physios, clinicians, nurses, doctors say to a patient, well, this is what exercise looks like for you with your health condition, and if you say, I know I've done this as a nurse, I've said exercise to a patient and they just laugh at me. They're like, I can't run, I can't go to the gym. What do you And they're like, well, and then I'm like, and then they ask me, they're like, well, what do you mean by exercise? And I'm going, move more. Because I also can recognize that telling them to go for a 30-minute run is not safe for the right thing for them. So yeah, no, that's really fascinating. It's really cool. So with your research around exercise, and the fact, like, as you're talking, you're like, oh, my PhD student does this, that, and the other. Is it primarily just in people who've had a stroke, or is there other applications within your research as well that you've expanded out to?
Mostly stroke, I will say mostly stroke. I have some of our other research trainees that are doing different areas of like different conditions. in different areas of neuro rehab and cardiovascular rehab. But I would say stroke is probably the most, central. The other side of our research is not just like looking at how effective, like running trials and looking at how effective exercise is and how do we look at different forms or exercise approaches. But
Mm.
it's as you're saying, how do we get that knowledge to the people to use it in their daily lives? So we can do the
Mm.
stuff in the lab and at the university, but if it stays here, then it's not doing anyone any good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other side of our research is like, how do we get this into the hands of people who need it and could use
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
And how do we encourage, that kind of change in behavior, whether it's from the clinicians knowing like how to advise their patients, but also for the patient. So, in our own approach to exercise, like we know if we go to somebody and say we're doing a power training study and we're talking to somebody who's never exercised before, has never stepped into a gym, that's going to sound super intimidating. Like, no, like I'm not a gym person.
Yeah.
And it's finding that like accessible way to share with our participants, like, it's okay, you don't have to know, like, this is what we're here for. And we're gonna work with you to find a way for you to do it safely and comfortably. And
Yeah.
when they come into the environment, right, it's making sure that they know what to expect. Like, this machine will help you with this, and I'll help you set it up, and eventually you'll
Yeah.
learn how to like set your own weight and that kind of thing. But building their own capacity to
Yeah.
exercise on their own when our
Mm.
program is over. Um, One of our other trials is a telerehab program for
Mm.
lower limb recovery. And so
Mm-hmm.
we don't need that. That's one study where we don't need them to come into the lab. And it's been great because people can do their telerehab from their own home. And the telerehab program has 2 days a week where they're interacting with a therapist face to
Mm.
face and live. But then there's also a self-managed exercise component to that. So then before they come back, so if say they have the program Monday and Wednesday, the therapist works with them and says, okay, before I see you again next Monday, let's work through your exercise plan so you have something, and I want you to do at least, one extra exercise session a day before I see you again next week. And let's
Yeah.
work through what that looks like. And they go through, we give the therapist a script to say, this is how you're going to work through. Here's a worksheet.
Yeah.
Maybe these were the exercises you did with that
Yeah.
participant this week. Go through that, say 10 exercises and say, I think, these 8 are good. I'd feel
Yeah.
comfortable with you doing these 8. Maybe this ninth and 10th one was a little bit like maybe a little unsteady without me watching over you. Don't worry about
Yeah.
these ones, right? But do these
Yeah.
8,
Yeah.
and I think you can do them. And then let's figure out, like, what day are you going to do them? Are you going to do them Friday? Oh no, you want to do it Saturday, maybe when your grandchildren are here and you can do them
Okay.
together with them.
Yeah.
So come up with a very concrete action plan where
Nice.
they can still get that third day of exercise, but it doesn't require the therapist
Yeah.
there. So so the benefit is that hopefully it builds their own confidence and capacity to do the exercises on their own. It doesn't require the therapist support. So in terms of like resource
Yeah.
use, right? You're not now having to pay a therapist another
Yeah.
third day a week, right? But you're
Yeah.
giving that independence over to the participant. And so we do this through the program. It's only a 4-week program, but every week, at the end of every week, there's always an action plan. What are you going to do before I see you
Yeah.
again on next week? And so that we hope by the end of 4 weeks, they've done it enough times that they can come up with those action plans themselves. So it's empowering the patients, the participants, to
Yeah.
be able to, like, let's work through this, let's problem solve it together. You're doing great. And then they can carry on afterwards. And when they come back the following week, like when they come back on Monday again, the therapist, we have scripts in our manual saying, okay, check in with them, let you know that so that they can tell you how they did. And
Mm,
everything was great, that's awesome. But oh, they had a little bit of problem with this, or, okay, so
mm,
let's keep that in mind so that when we come to
yeah,
planning your action plan for this week, we'll plan around that. So it becomes a dialogue, it becomes
yeah,
something that's like collaboratively developed. And over
yeah.
time, hope that you can hand it over and the patients aren't reliant on us being there for them to
Yeah.
exercise.
That sounds fascinating. So how far along is that study? Are you like halfway through? Are you still recruiting? Like where's that one at?
We're still recruiting. We're still recruiting. Yeah, and just about halfway through. So exactly what you just said. Um, yeah, yeah,
I can read your mind.
yeah. Exactly.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, I definitely like everybody out there listening, like again, go into the episode description because we'll list in like how you can follow Ada so that you can get updates on that research and the other research that she's doing as well. Because it sounds really, really like really important work, but also really fascinating. Like, I've always been really frustrated by like the generic leaflets that you give out. And I'm not saying that those don't have a place. But like, just because we know you should exercise times a week, it's about how you make that real for that person. It sounds like this research that you're doing around this telehealth exercise app thing. I'm sure it has a much cooler name than what I've just muddled through.
You got it.
um, but that thing, it's not just about prescribing or giving that leaflet to them. It's about personalizing it and supporting them through it. So, like you said, it empowers and embeds that exercise. And I love, like you just said it offhand, but I thought, like, what a great way to do it. It's like, get the grandkids involved. Like, you know, have it be something that becomes social and fun and whatnot rather than that perception that I think a lot of people have about the gym of, it's only for those sorts of people who want big muscles and, things like that. So yeah, no, really fascinating. Ooh.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we just launched in collaboration with my colleagues in Toronto is an implementation toolkit for aerobic exercise. So
Oh.
it's really we try to make it very kind of practical tips for
Hmm.
a clinician who's like, I know that I should be doing exercise with my patients in stroke. I don't know where to start. And the toolkit is actually called
Ah.
Start. So I have to credit Liz Innes, my colleague, for coming up with that brilliant name. But it's kind of taking through you know, your your everyday clinician who knows, this is what the evidence is saying, but I don't know where to
Yeah.
start. Pick up our toolkit and they can hopefully work through it and it'll take you through, okay, what do you need to consider in terms of like, um, do you need equipment? Do you need space? Do you need some funds to purchase any equipment? Do you have, blood pressure cuffs to check
Yeah.
BP? Do you have, your manager or your director on board and in support kind of in principle? Do you yourself have the knowledge about how do I take blood pressure when somebody is exercising? Do I know how
Yeah.
to check
Yeah.
someone's sats? Do I know how to like put a heart rate monitor on? I don't know, whatever, those
Mm.
kinds of things. So we kind of talk through all of these very practical things about implementing exercise into your daily practice.
Yeah.
And then one of the chapters is also about how do you help your patients sustain exercise after you discharge them. So we give some worksheets like here's some sample like exercise sheets that you can give them that outlines like what they should do. And then that could
Yeah.
be a tool that you can give them when they are being discharged. Talk to them about community programs that are in the area where they live so that assemble those together so that can be part of your discharge package. So we try to think about exercise, you know, not just in the time where the patient is with you in the hospital, but
Yeah.
how do you help promote them sustaining it over time?
Yeah.
So that toolkit, we just released it at the end of last year, and it's on the University Health Network website. But yeah, I'm happy to share that
I was
because
going to say,
that's
definitely send the links.
freely available. We'd love for people to access it, and we'd love to hear from people what their impressions are.
Oh, thank you so much, Ada, for telling us all about your research. I'm like, I think one of the things that I love most about having conversations like this with other like researchers who are clinical, like yourself, is it's just so lovely to hear from somebody who, like you, is has achieved a really beautiful spectrum of research from that more isolated specialist lab research all the way to that very practical implementation, helping those clinicians actually be evidence-based clinicians. Because it's like you said, like, and I think I've had it in my head, but I think like you're the first person I've actually said that. It's not just about being able to say, "Oh, I'm evidence-based," but how? How do you implement that evidence in your practice? Especially like, if there's barriers around. So, do we have the staff to support? Do we have the equipment? All of those things. And it's that real world implementation of research that started way back here in the lab that changes patients' lives and clinicians' lives. So,
Thank you.
very
Well, yeah,
impressive.
I mean, I think a lot of it, as this whole conversation started, was, my own personal journey and who I am or who I was as a clinician, right? Like I said, has continued to like really ground me in what I do
Yeah.
now. But it's also like the amazing people I get to work with, right? Like I still connect with all my colleagues in Toronto, and we were able to put this START toolkit together, the tele-rehab study, and all the self-managed portion of that exercise program. That's my colleague out at UBC, who's an expert in self-management and use of digital technologies. So the two of us have been able to put our heads together and put this program together, and I think a lot of amazing researchers out there who have great expertise and putting our heads together and coming up with really innovative ideas that we hope can help both clinicians and patients.
Brilliant. Right. I've just seen the time. Last question. I know it goes too fast. Last question is, why should that physio, whether they're in Canada or Timbuktu, who's just starting their education as a physiotherapist, why should they work to the extent that you've worked to embed research in their career?
Yeah, research, research informs care. We hope that research informs care, and we hope that the research that, researchers are doing is high quality research that can inform good care.
Mm.
So does somebody who's embarking on their physiotherapy career need to be a researcher? No. But I think as somebody, embarking on their PT career should be aware of what the research is saying. Absolutely, yes. Right. And
Mm.
research is changing all the time. Like what we know now today is not necessarily going to be, what translates to practice tomorrow or 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Mm.
And so because research is changing, that means practice should also change with it.
Yeah.
Um, but research isn't the be all and end all, right? Because there's a lot of gaps in what we know in research. And there's a lot of things that we haven't, we haven't yet explored in research.
Mm.
So the clinician has to be able to take that and what they know clinically and what that person in front of them is telling us about their lives and their goals and their challenges and issues and put it all together. So that
Mm.
the clinician is, the clinician is trying to piece all of that together, which is,
Mm,
I think what makes for, really exciting part, the challenge and the what am I trying to say? Um, I can't think of the word, but it's just like one of those things that always kept me interested in being a clinician, right? This is what I loved
yeah,
about being a clinician, because every single person that comes to you is going to look a little bit different. They're going to come with their own history and their own journey and their own story. I
yeah,
have to take that with what I know, what the research is saying, what I know from my own professional experience, and put that
yeah,
all together. So it was always refreshing and new and exciting, and I was always learning.
yeah.
And I hope that any, people who are embarking on their own careers will find that same excitement and,
Mm.
refreshment, and like always kind of like curiosity. I think maybe that those are all the things I'm trying to talk around, but that's what I hope for people who are embarking on their own professional careers.
I love that because I think you're right. Research isn't the be all and end all. And I think, regardless of where you sit on that research experience spectrum, whether you're just helping out with a study, whether you're PhD, whether you're professor, wherever you are, is I think it's exactly what you said. It's that magical combination as a clinician, as somebody who's aspiring to help people, of curiosity, science, and personalization.
Yeah, yeah. You said that way better than I did.
It's just, no, no, you gave me the idea. I just summarized it. I just made it in a shorter sentence for once.
That was much better.
Ah, brilliant, Ada. Thank you so much for joining on this episode. And thank you so much for sharing about your journey, about how it was like the transition into professorship, as well as all of your really fascinating research. It's been a joy to get to hear more about how life has been since our days. I don't even want to say the year out loud when we were in the basement in Toronto. So thank you very much for your time.
Nothing's changed, Rosalind. My lab here is also in a basement with no windows. So I'm talking about this lab space being, I'm super grateful that we have it, but we don't have any windows. So
Maybe
how can I move
someday.
up a
Maybe
floor?
someday.
I just need to move up one floor and then I'll have some windows and then I'll have made it.
It's the little goals in life. Like, it's just funny. Like, you're aspiring to have a window in your lab space. I'm aspiring to be able to have somebody to do my references. you know. Oh, brilliant. Right. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Don't go away. Up next, we have the top 3 takeaways from this week's podcast by Dr. Rosalind Austin. Getting to hear the details of Ada's journey through research, her transition from clinician into academic, and how she's holding on to that clinical connection despite maybe not being on a ward anymore. She still has managed within her research to maintain a solid clinical connection so that her research spans everything from lab all the way to implementation, both for patients as well as in supporting clinicians to translate the results from her research into their practice. It's such an inspiring journey and story to have heard. Um, so thanks again, Ada, for being so open and sharing all of that with us. Right. Top 3 takeaways for me. Number 1, bit controversial, is research doesn't have to be a part of your plan. I think this podcast, and I mean, the clue's in the title, it's all about research and revealing how people got into research. So there's going to be a bias towards how do you get involved in research. I thought it was really interesting that Ada is sharing with us that actually for her, research was never part of the plan. It wasn't what she wanted to do. And, it was only because she was approached and encouraged by one of her mentors to start to go down that pathway. But for her, the real passion was that clinical work. And she's made choices along the way that have meant that she's much more research and much more academic. And that's not a criticism, that's just her pathway. But she's managed to keep that spark for the clinical side alive. And she believes very strongly in the importance of clinicians who are evidence-based, who do know how to translate that research into practice so that patients and their own clinical workloads benefit. And I think that's really inspiring, is to remember that you doesn't have to be part of your plan, and you can still to do a PhD, you can still have strings of research in your career without having to be a researcher. Second takeaway is, do you have to be a clinical academic? So we've had other people on and we've talked about what is a clinical academic, and now Ada's introduced another term. In Canada, they call them clinical scientists. But that mixture between clinical and academic, and she was sharing, yes, some people do that, but in Canada, similar to the UK, similar to a lot of places, it's up to that individual to make that happen, either through perseverance, through supportive environments, whatever. But it's a trailblazing role. And talking a little bit, especially around her journey, of, is that necessary? Because she's managed very successfully, listening to her program of research, to maintain that clinical connection without actual physical clinical time. I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. It's just food for thought of, do you actually need to do both in order to be a relevant, impactful researcher in health? Think about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Third and final takeaway is, and I loved this, bringing it all together. Now, I don't mean necessarily bringing your education together, yada, yada. What I mean by bringing it all together and listening to the breadth and spectrum of research that she does. So very lab-based, controlled situations, clinical trials, randomized clinical trials that she runs around prescribing of exercise, like how much, how little, what's safe, what's not safe for people who've had stroke. But then she also does work around how to translate that into clinical practice, working with clinicians, and her cool, the toolkit that they've developed. The link will be in the description to that. There's a wide spectrum from that controlled environment all the way to the real world environment. And she's not the only researcher who I've heard of who's done that, but in our conversation, she's the first one who's kind of shown how she's managed to facilitate that. And for her, she's done that because as she went through her research journey, her master's, her PhD, her postdoc position, and even her work now as assistant professor and now full professor, yay, Ada, how individuals along that journey, she's maintained that network, maintained those relationships, and now together they're building these different projects all along that spectrum, from lab to implementation and real world stuff, in order to increase the impact of their collaborative work together. And I think, wow, that's so inspiring. And something that I think I'm definitely putting in my back pocket to take with me on my research journey. But just a little reminder that networking isn't just about this collaboration so that you get your name on different papers, but it's also a way to build, global, it's a way to build a reputation as a global or international researcher, but I think more importantly than that, especially as health researchers, we want to improve people's health through their research, helping build a spectrum which goes through that very lab focused all the way to real world focus, so that that transition and that implementation of that research hopefully gets shorter than the accepted 17 years. That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you all again in 3 weeks' time. Keep asking why.